3 weeks after the historic fight, the changes across the galaxy were impossible to ignore. Captain Li Wu-jin stood in his quarters reading reports from human intelligence services that painted a picture of a civilization in upheaval. The defeat of Vex the Bone Crusher had created shockwaves that were still spreading. The Vorthak homeworlds had gone completely silent. All communication attempts were met with automated responses that simply said the Great Contemplation was in progress. Spy. Satellites showed massive gatherings of the ancient predators in their temple cities, where they appeared to be engaged in philosophical discussions that sometimes lasted for days. Dr. Yang Ji-won had become the most requested speaker at medical conferences across the galaxy. Her analysis of human psychological advantages was being studied by military academies on 50 different worlds. Everyone wanted to understand how mental discipline and adaptability could overcome physical superiority. The Brescon colonies were experiencing their first period of peace in over 200 years. The insect people had lived in constant fear of Vorthak raids for generations, but now their ancient tormentors had simply disappeared. The psychological relief was so great that some Brescon hives were holding celebration festivals that lasted for weeks. Security Chief Choi Sunmi found herself surrounded by martial arts instructors from dozens of species who wanted to learn her fighting techniques. She had established training centers on 17 different worlds, teaching the principles of using an opponent's strength against them. The most dramatic changes were happening in the Empire military. High Command had spent centuries developing weapons and strategies to contain the Vorthak threat. Now they were scrambling to understand how one human with no weapons had accomplished what their most advanced technology could not. Park Minji was processing diplomatic messages from species that humanity had never heard of before. Ancient civilizations that had hidden in remote star systems were emerging from isolation now that the Vorthak threat seemed diminished. The galactic community was expanding rapidly as fear gave way to curiosity. Navigator Seo Younghwan plotted courses to 12 different worlds where human delegations were being invited to share their knowledge and culture. Species that had barely acknowledged human existence were now offering formal alliances and trade agreements. Zenthari crystal people had sent their most precious gift, a living crystal that could store and transmit thoughts and emotions. The gift came with a message explaining that they wanted to understand how humans could remain calm in the face of overwhelming danger. The advanced Kelix had opened their most secret research facilities to human scientists, offering to share technology that they had never revealed to any other species. Their message was simple. They wanted to learn how to combine their advanced science with human adaptability and courage. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun was overwhelmed by offers of new technology from grateful governments. The Terra Nova was being upgraded with the most advanced systems in the galaxy, transforming it from a simple exploration vessel into a marvel of engineering. But not everyone was happy about humanity's sudden rise to prominence. Intelligence reports warned that some species were concerned about human expansion. The Corvin hegemony had issued statements suggesting that humans might become as dangerous as the Vorthak if they were allowed to gain too much power. The most interesting reactions came from species that had never encountered the Vorthak directly. The peaceful traders of the Inner Rim had lived sheltered lives protected by distance and diplomatic immunity. They could not understand why defeating one alien warrior was considered so important. Ambassador Williams sent regular updates from the Empire capital where debate was raging about how to integrate humanity into the existing power structure. Some council members wanted to offer humans full membership immediately, while others preferred a more cautious approach. The economic implications were staggering stock. Markets on 100 worlds were fluctuating wildly as investors tried to predict what human involvement would mean for various industries. Defense contractors were seeing their values plummet while exploration and colonization companies were Experiencing massive growth, Dr. Yang Ji-won received a disturbing report from her contacts in the medical community. Vorthak physiology experts were reporting that the entire species appeared to be undergoing some kind of psychological transformation. The defeat had triggered changes in their brain chemistry that no one fully understood. The Terra Nova crew had become celebrities, but they were also becoming symbols of human potential. Captain Lee found himself giving speeches to alien audiences, who saw him as representing everything that made humanity special. His simple exploration crew had become ambassadors for their entire species. Security Chief Choi Sun-mi was invited to address the Empire War College, where she spoke to an audience of military leaders from 30 different species. Her message was simple: superior technology and overwhelming force were not the only paths to victory. Intelligence, adaptation, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy and became known as the David Doctrine, after an ancient human story about a small warrior defeating a giant enemy. The principles she outlined became required reading in military academies throughout known space park. Minji documented the social changes happening across the galaxy as species that had lived in fear for centuries began to explore new possibilities. The end of Vorthak raids had freed up enormous resources that could now be used for peaceful development. The Brescan were expanding their territory for the first time in generations, building new hive cities and establishing colonies in systems they had previously avoided. The relief from constant fear had unlocked creativity and ambition that had been suppressed for centuries. Even more dramatic changes were happening among younger members of various species. Children who had grown up hearing stories about the invincible Vorthak were now hearing stories about humans who refused to surrender. Psychological impact was creating a generation that was less willing to accept that some challenges were impossible. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun reported that requests for human technical assistance were flooding in from across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to understand how human engineering principles differed from established galactic practices. The combination of creativity and practicality that humans displayed was inspiring new approaches to old problems. Navigator Seo Jung-hwan calculated that human exploration vessels were now welcome in systems that had been closed to outsiders for thousands of years. The victory over the Vorthak had earned humanity a reputation for courage and trustworthiness that opened doors throughout the galaxy. The most profound changes were happening in areas that had been under direct Vorthak control for generations. Entire star systems were emerging from centuries of oppression, discovering that their ancient oppressors had simply disappeared. Overnight liberation movements that had been hiding in remote asteroids and hidden bases were suddenly finding themselves in control of their homeworlds. The power vacuum left by Vorthak withdrawal was creating opportunities for freedom that had not existed for millennia. Dr. Yang Ji-won published a follow-up study examining the psychological impact of hope on oppressed populations. Her research showed that the mere knowledge that the Vorthak could be defeated had triggered massive social changes across hundreds of worlds. The Terra Nova continued its journey toward the Empire capital, but their destination had changed in importance. They were no longer going to report on a simple exploration mission. They were going to help determine the future structure of galactic civilization. Captain Lee realized that his crew had become something larger than themselves. They were proof that any species could achieve greatness if they had the courage to face their fears and refuse to accept defeat. The small exploration ship that had started its mission to map unknown star systems had instead mapped a new future for the entire galaxy. The ripple effects of one impossible victory were still spreading, and no one could predict where they would lead, but one thing was certain. The galaxy would never again be the same place where some species were considered naturally superior to others. Humanity had proven that courage and determination could overcome any advantage, and that lesson would not be forgotten. News of the impossible victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Park Minji had been transmitting live footage of the fight to Earth, and within hours, every human colony was celebrating the small exploration ship Terra Nova had become the most famous vessel in human history. Overnight, Captain Li Wu-jin found himself receiving communication requests from governments and military leaders throughout the Galactic Empire species that had never spoken to humans before were suddenly very interested in opening diplomatic relations. The Zenthari Crystal people sent a formal invitation to their homeworld. The advanced Kelix offered to share their most secret technologies. But the most dramatic changes were happening among the Vorthak themselves. Commander Grax had returned to his bioship in a state of shock that his species had never experienced before. For 3,000 years, they had been the ultimate predators in the galaxy. Now they had been defeated by creatures they considered weak and primitive. Dr. Yang Jiwon was treating Choi Sunmi in the medical bay for exhaustion and minor injuries. The security chief had bruises on her arms and legs from avoiding the Vorthak's attacks, but nothing serious. She was more tired than hurt and kept asking if the fight had really happened. The victory was being analyzed by military experts on 100 different worlds. Everyone wanted to understand how a single human had defeated the galaxy's greatest warrior. The footage was studied frame by frame, and Sunmi's fighting techniques were being copied by soldiers throughout known space. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun was repairing the damage to the cargo bay where Vex the Bone Crusher had crashed into the wall. The impact had been so powerful that it had bent the metal support beams, but Kim was more interested in the psychological impact of what had happened. Navigator Seo Young-hwan was plotting a course back to human space, but their orders had changed. Instead of returning to Earth immediately, they were being directed to the Galactic Empire capital world, where Captain Lee was supposed to address the High Council. The first signs of the greater change came from reports of Vorthak fleets withdrawing from battle zones across the galaxy. Conflicts that had been raging for years suddenly ended as the ancient predators retreated to their home systems without explanation. The Brescan survivors from other colonies reported that Vorthak raiders who had been terrorizing their space lanes had simply disappeared. The insect people could not understand why their tormentors had suddenly lost interest in hunting them. The Kelix military command noticed that Vorthak bioships were avoiding any system where human vessels might be present. Even the rumor that humans were in the area was enough to make the ancient warriors change course and find easier targets. Security Chief Choi Sunmi became the most studied person in galactic history. Xenobiologists from dozens of species wanted to examine her fighting techniques and understand how she had defeated such a superior opponent. Her victory was being called the most important military event in 1,000 years. The psychological impact on the Vorthak was even more significant than the physical defeat. They had built their entire civilization on the belief that they were the ultimate predators, that no other species could match their strength and ferocity. The loss of that certainty was devastating. To their collective psyche, reports began arriving from intelligence sources that the Vorthak were experiencing something their language had no word for. The closest translation was deep contemplation, but it was more than that. It was a fundamental questioning of everything they thought they knew about themselves and their place in the universe. Captain Lee received a message from Admiral Chen, the highest-ranking human military officer. The message was brief but clear. Congratulations on your historic victory. You and your crew are heroes. The entire human species is proud of what you have accomplished, but with fame came responsibility. The Terra Nova was no longer just an exploration vessel. It had become a symbol of human potential and courage. Other species were watching to see what humanity would do with their newfound reputation. Dr. Yang Ji-won published her medical analysis of the fight in the Galactic Science Journal. Her paper explained how human physiology and psychology had given Sunmi advantages that the Vorthok had never encountered before. Humans could adapt and improvise in ways that no other known species could match. The most important discovery was that humans had a unique ability to overcome fear through training and mental discipline. While other species either fled from superior opponents or attacked with mindless aggression, humans could analyze threats and develop strategies to defeat seemingly impossible enemies. Park Minji found herself promoted to Chief Communications Officer as requests for interviews and diplomatic meetings flooded in from across the galaxy. She was working 18-hour days trying to coordinate responses to all the attention they were receiving. The Galactic Empire. Leadership was struggling to understand the implications of what had happened. For centuries, they had used the Vorthak as their ultimate weapon, knowing that the mere threat of releasing them was enough to keep rebellious systems in line. Now that weapon had been proven fallible, Ambassador Williams, the senior human diplomat in the Empire, sent a message warning that not everyone was happy about humanity's victory. Some species were concerned that humans might become too powerful if they continued, to prove themselves superior to established galactic powers. The Vorthak themselves were the biggest question mark. Intelligence reports suggested that they had withdrawn all their forces to their home systems and were engaging in what appeared to be a species-wide philosophical debate. The implications of losing to humans had shaken the foundations of their society. Navigator Seo Jungwan calculated that it would take 3 months to reach the Empire capital at maximum speed, during which time the crew of the Terra Nova would have to adjust to being the most famous humans in the galaxy. The quiet exploration mission they had started was now a diplomatic and military milestone. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun worked around the clock to upgrade their ship systems using technology offered by grateful alien governments. The Terra Nova was being transformed from a simple exploration vessel into a symbol of human achievement and potential. The victory had changed everything, not just for the crew of one small ship, but for the entire balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity had announced its presence in the most dramatic way possible by defeating the species that every other civilization feared. Security Chief Choi Sunmi finally recovered enough to resume her duties, but she found that her role had changed completely. She was no longer just responsible for ship security. She had become the living proof that humans could achieve the impossible when they refused to give up. Fight in the cargo bay had lasted less than an hour, but its effects would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. The small human woman who had faced down the galaxy's greatest predator had no idea that she had just changed the course of history as the Terra Nova continued its journey toward the Empire capital. The crew could see that their simple exploration mission had become something much larger. They were no longer just representatives of humanity. They were symbols of what any species could achieve if they had the courage to stand up to seemingly impossible odds. The galaxy would never be the same again. The transport pod from the Vorthak bioship attached itself to the Terra Nova cargo bay with a sound like metal bones breaking. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun had worked for 2 hours to modify the cargo bay into a fighting arena, removing all the best equipment and creating a clear space 30 meters wide. Security. Chief Choi Sunmi stood in the center of the empty bay wearing her simple black exercise clothes. She had removed all jewelry and tied her long hair back in a tight knot. Her face was calm, but her dark eyes were completely focused like a predator, preparing to hunt. Captain Lee Woo-jin watched from the observation deck above the cargo bay. Along with the rest of the crew, Dr. Yang Ji-won had medical equipment ready in case Sunmi was injured, but everyone knew that if the fight went badly, there might not be anything left to treat. The airlock door opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and the Vorthak champion entered the cargo bay. The sight of him made several crew members take an involuntary step backward, even though they were safely behind reinforced glass vex. The bone crusher was even larger than Commander Grax, standing almost 13 feet tall with muscles that bulged under his black metallic skin. His arms ended in claws that were each as long as a human hand and sharp enough to cut through steel. His head was covered with bony ridges, and his mouth was filled with teeth like broken glass. The alien warrior looked around the cargo bay with contempt. Written on his horrible features, he had killed over 10,000 sentient beings in personal combat and had never been defeated by any opponent. He expected this fight to last less than 30 seconds. Navigator Seo Jungwan was recording everything, on multiple cameras, so that humanity would have a complete record of what happened. The footage would either show their greatest victory or their most terrible defeat, but either way, it needed to be preserved. Park. Minji was monitoring communications from the Vorthak ships and could hear the alien commanders discussing the upcoming fight with amusement. They were placing bets on how quickly their champion would kill the small human female. Some thought it would take 10 seconds. Others thought. Dr. Yang Jiwon was studying her medical sensors and noticed something interesting. Choi Sunmi's heart rate was actually decreasing as she faced her impossible opponent. Her stress hormones were dropping to normal levels, while the Vorthak warriors' biological signs showed increasing excitement and aggression. The rules had been established through careful negotiation. No weapons of any kind, no protective equipment, no outside assistance, and no killing unless absolutely necessary. The fight would continue until one combatant could no longer defend themselves. Captain Lee activated the communication system so that both fighters could hear him clearly. "The contest begins now," he announced, and immediately stepped back from the microphone to avoid interfering with what was about to happen. Vex. The bone crusher roared with a sound that shook the entire cargo bay and made the metal walls vibrate. The roar was designed to paralyze prey with fear and had worked on thousands of victims from dozens of different species. But Choi Sunmi did not freeze with terror. Instead, she took a single step forward. The Vorthak warrior charged across the cargo bay, moving faster than something his size should have been able to move. His 4 clawed arms reached out to grab the human female and tear her apart, just like he had done to so many others. But when his claws closed, they found only empty air. Choi Sunmi had moved at the last possible second, sliding under his massive arms and ending up behind him before he could react. Her movement was so smooth and precise that it looked like she had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times. The alien warrior spun around with fury in his black eyes and lashed out with all 4 arms at once, creating a deadly web of razor-sharp claws that should have been impossible to avoid. But somehow the small human woman was no longer where she had been standing. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun watched from above with amazement as Sunmi seemed to flow around, the Vorthak's attacks like water flowing around a rock. Every time the creature tried to strike her, she was somewhere else, moving with a grace and speed that defied logic. The fight continued for 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. The Vorthak warrior was becoming frustrated and angry as none of his attacks could connect with his tiny opponent. Meanwhile, Choi Sunmi was landing precise strikes on pressure points and joint connections that she had studied in alien anatomy texts. Dr. Yang Jiwon noticed that the biological readings were changing dramatically. The Vorthak's stress levels were climbing higher and higher, while his energy reserves were being depleted by his massive size and constant attacking. Sunmi, on the other hand, was conserving her energy and striking only when she could cause maximum damage. The crew of the Terra Nova watched in silent amazement as their security chief fought the most dangerous predator in the galaxy to a standstill. Every time Vex tried to use his superior size and strength against her, she turned those advantages into weaknesses. After 40 minutes of combat, something unprecedented happened. The Vorthak warrior stumbled and nearly fell. His breathing was labored, and his movements were becoming slower. and less coordinated. The creature that had never been defeated was showing signs of exhaustion. Choi Sun-mi saw her opportunity and pressed her attack. She moved in close and struck several nerve clusters that she had identified during her study of Vorthak physiology. The alien warrior's left side went numb and 2 of his 4 arms stopped responding to his commands. The fight was turning in humanity's favor, but it was far from over. Vex roared with rage and desperation and began attacking. With wild abandon, his remaining claws swept through the air in deadly arcs that would have killed 10 humans if they had connected, but they did not connect. Sun-mi continued to move like smoke, avoiding every strike while landing her own attacks on vital points that gradually wore down her massive opponent. She was fighting the perfect fight using skill and intelligence against brute force and intimidation. Park Minji reported that the communications from the Vorthak ships had gone completely silent. The alien commanders were no longer placing bets or making jokes. They were watching their greatest champion struggle against a creature they had dismissed as weak and harmless. After 50 minutes of combat, Vex the Bone Crusher made one final, desperate attack. He threw himself forward with all his remaining strength, intending to crush the human female under his massive weight. But Sun-mi was ready for this move too. She stepped aside and used the Vorthak's own momentum against him, guiding his fall so that he crashed into the metal wall of the cargo bay with tremendous force. The impact shook the entire ship and left a dent in the reinforced hull. The alien warrior tried to get back up, but his body would not obey his commands. The accumulated damage from 50 minutes of precise strikes had taken its toll on even his incredibly tough physiology. He lay on the cargo bay floor breathing heavily, but unable to continue fighting. Choi Sun-mi stood over her defeated opponent, ready to continue if necessary, but it was clear that the fight was over. She had done the impossible. She had defeated the Vorthak's greatest warrior in single combat, using nothing but human determination and fighting skill. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of labored breathing from the fallen alien champion. Captain Lee activated the communication system to contact the Vorthak ships, but for several minutes there was no response. Finally, Commander Grax appeared on the screen, again. But he looked different now. The arrogance and amusement were gone from his black eyes, replaced by something that might have been confusion or even fear. "Your champion has won," he said slowly, as if he could not believe the words he was speaking. "We will honor our agreement and withdraw from this sector of space immediately." The Vorthak transport pod retrieved their unconscious champion and departed without another word. The 3 bioships turned away from the Terra Nova and disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the humans alone with their incredible victory. Choi Sun-mi collapsed to her knees in the cargo bay. Not from injury, but from the emotional release of surviving an impossible fight. The crew rushed down to congratulate her, but she was too exhausted to respond. They had done it. A single human had defeated the galaxy's most feared predator in fair combat and changed everything forever. The Terra Nova traveled through hyperspace for 6 hours before reaching the Kepler 442 system. Captain Lee Woo-jin stood on the bridge watching the stars stretch into long lines of light as they moved faster than anything in nature should be able. To move, navigator Seo Jungwon was checking his calculations for the 10th time to make sure they would arrive at exactly the right location. When they dropped out of hyperspace, the sight that greeted them was worse than any nightmare. The planet. Kepler 442b was glowing red and orange like a giant coal in a fire. The Brescan colony that had lived there for 50 years was completely gone. 2 million insect people had been wiped out in a matter of hours. Pieces of destroyed space stations floated everywhere like metallic snow. Each piece told a story of desperate fighting and quick defeat. The Brescan had built their defenses according to the best military science in the galaxy, but none of it had mattered against the Vorthak Dr. Yang. Jiwan was scanning the debris field with her medical equipment, trying to find any signs of life. Her instruments could detect biological activity from very far away, but they showed nothing except death. The silence from the planet's surface was complete and final. 3 massive ships hung in orbit around the dead world like sleeping giants. Each one was the size of a small moon, and they did not look like any technology the humans had ever seen before. The hulls were not made of metal or plastic, but of something that looked alive and breathing. Dark veins pulsed along the surface, carrying unknown fluids to unknown purposes. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun stared at the bioships through the main viewing screen and shook his head slowly. "Those are not machines," he said quietly. "They are living creatures. The whole ship is one giant animal that has been trained to carry weapons and soldiers." The largest of the 3 bioships began turning toward the Terra Nova like a massive predator that had noticed a small prey animal approaching weapon pods along its surface, started glowing with deadly energy that made the space around them shimmer like heat waves. The humans could feel the power building up, even from thousands of kilometers. Away Security Chief Choi Soon-mi checked the readings on her tactical display, and her face became very serious. "Captain," she said, "we have about 2 minutes before they have enough power to vaporize us with one shot. Should I prepare the escape pods?" "Captain." Lee looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They had come this far, and they were not going to back down now. He walked to the communication console and opened a channel on all frequencies, hoping the Vorthak would at least listen before destroying them. The response came faster than expected. The main viewing screen flickered and then showed something that made everyone on the bridge take a step backward, a creature that was clearly not from any world that supported. Normal life appeared before them. The Vorthak commander was 12 feet tall with black skin that reflected light like polished metal. His head was elongated and covered with small spikes that moved constantly like they were tasting the air around him. 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws hung at his sides, ready to tear apart anything that came within reach. His eyes were the worst part. They were completely black, with no visible pupils or iris, just empty darkness that seemed to absorb light, without giving anything back. When he looked at the humans through the screen, it felt like being stared at by death itself. The creature spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stone mixed with breaking glass. "I am Grax the World Eater," he said, and his words made the speakers on the bridge crackle with static. "You are the species called humans that we have heard whispers about in the Void Park." Minji was recording everything and sending copies back to Earth through quantum communication. She wanted to make sure that if they were destroyed, humanity would at least know what the Vorthak looked like and how they spoke. "Your species is new to this galaxy," continued Grax. "You have not learned to fear us as all others have learned. We have devoured civilizations that were ancient when your son was young. We have torn apart species that had technology. You cannot imagine." Captain Lee stepped forward so that the Vorthak could see him clearly. He was much smaller than the alien commander, and his skin was soft and pink compared to the metallic blackness of his enemy, but he did not show any fear as he looked directly into those empty black eyes. "We know who you are," he said in a steady voice. "We have heard the stories about your power and your victories, but we did not come here to beg for mercy or to offer surrender. We came here to make you an offer." The Vorthak commander tilted his massive head to one side like a confused animal. His 4 claws clicked together, making a sound, like knives being sharpened. "An offer," he repeated. "You wish to bargain with us. Little soft creature, you have nothing we want except the pleasure of hunting. You captain." Lee smiled, and it was not the smile of someone who was afraid. It was the smile of someone who had a plan. "We challenge you to a contest," he said. "If we win, you leave this sector of space and never return. If you win, You can destroy our homeworld first, before continuing your conquest." The silence that followed was so complete that the humans could hear their own heartbeats. Grax stared at Captain Lee like he was looking at something impossible. His three companions appeared on the screen behind him, and all four Vorthak began making sounds that might have been laughter. The sound was horrible, like metal being torn apart, mixed with the screams of dying animals. It went on for almost a minute before Grax raised one of his clawed hands for silence. "You dare challenge us," he said in disbelief. "You tiny mammals think you can compete with the Vorthak in any contest of skill or strength." Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun was working frantically at his console, preparing the cargo bay for what might happen next. If the Vorthak accepted the challenge, they would need a place where representatives from both species could meet safely. The alien commander leaned closer to the screen, and his black eyes seemed to burn with inner fire. "Very well," he said. "We accept your pathetic challenge. We will crush your champion, and then we will take great pleasure in hunting down every member of your species." Slowly, Dr. Yang Ji-won began scanning all the humans on the ship to determine who was in the best physical condition for what was coming. She knew that whoever volunteered to fight would be facing something that no human had ever encountered before. Security Chief Choi Sun-mi stepped forward and looked directly at the Vorthak commander. "I will be our champion," she said in a calm voice. "When do we begin?" Grax looked at the small human female, and his horrible laughter started again. "You!" he said between laughs. "You will be the one to face our greatest warrior. This will be even more amusing than I thought." The challenge was set. Single combat with no weapons, no armor, and no assistance until one fighter could no longer continue. The Vorthak would send their champion to the human ship, and the contest would take place in their cargo bay, as the communication ended and the screen went dark. Captain Lee looked at Choi Sun-mi with worry in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. She nodded and began stretching her muscles, preparing for the fight of her life. "Someone has to do it," she said. "And I would rather die fighting than live running away." The crew of the Terra Nova watched as a small transport pod separated from the largest bioship and began moving toward them, carrying death in the form of the Vorthak's greatest warrior. The morning started like any other morning on the human exploration ship, Terra Nova. Captain Lee Woo-jin was drinking his coffee and reading reports from the night shift when the emergency signal came through the ship's communication system. The red lights started flashing, and the loud alarm made everyone jump from their seats. Park Minji was sitting at her communication desk when the first message arrived. Her hands were shaking as she read the words on her screen. The message was from the Galactic Empire headquarters, and it was marked with the highest level of emergency. She had never seen anything like this before in her 2 years of service. The message was simple, but terrifying. All ships must leave the Outer Rim territories. Immediately, the Vorthak have awakened from their long sleep, and they are moving toward populated systems. Every species must evacuate now. This is not a drill park. Minji called Captain Lee to the communication room right away. When he arrived and read the message, his face became very serious. He had heard stories about the Vorthak when he was a young officer, but he thought they were just legends told to scare new recruits. The Vorthak were not just any alien species. They were living nightmares that the Galactic Empire had used as their ultimate weapon for thousands of years. These creatures were 12 feet tall with black skin that looked like metal. Their claws were sharp enough to cut through the strongest materials known to science. Their eyes were completely black and showed no emotion at all. For the past 100 years, the Vorthak had been sleeping in special chambers deep in space. The Empire only woke them up when they needed to destroy entire star systems that refused to follow their rules. Most species in the galaxy had never seen a Vorthak in person, but everyone knew the stories about what they could do. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun came running to the communication room when he heard the alarms. He was a big man with strong hands that were always covered in oil from working on the ship's engines. He looked at the message and whistled softly under his breath. "This is bad," he said very quietly. Security Chief Choi Soon-mi arrived next. She was a small woman, but everyone on the ship respected her fighting skills. She had trained in martial arts since she was 5 years old and could beat any man on the ship in hand-to-hand combat. When she read the message, her eyes became very focused, like they always did when she was thinking about danger. Dr. Yang Ji-won came from the medical bay still wearing her white coat. She was the youngest officer on the ship, but also one of the smartest. She had studied alien biology at the best schools on Earth and knew more about other species than most experts who had worked for decades. Navigator Seo Jung-hwan was the last to arrive because he had been working on mapping the current star system. His job was to make sure the ship went where it was supposed to go, and he was very good at his work. He could calculate jump coordinates faster than the ship's computer captain. Lee looked at his team and saw worry in their eyes, but also trust. They had been working together for 3 years and had faced many dangers in unexplored space. But nothing they had encountered before was anything like the Vorthak Moore messages started coming through the communication system, and each one made the situation sound worse. The crystal people, called the Zenthari, had tried to fight the Vorthak and had been completely destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Their energy weapons and diamond-hard skin meant nothing against the ancient predators. The Kellics were known throughout the galaxy for having the best technology and the strongest shields. Their plasma weapons could destroy asteroids, and their force fields could stop nuclear explosions. But when they met the Vorthak, their advanced science was useless. The creatures tore through their defenses like they were made of paper. Even the Breskin swarms had been wiped out, and that seemed impossible. The Breskin were insect-like aliens who worked together in groups of millions. They could cover entire planets like a living carpet, and their coordination was perfect. But the Vorthak had killed them all in just a few hours. Every species that tried to fight the Vorthak had the same result: total defeat and complete destruction. The creatures seemed to be unstoppable forces of nature that could not be reasoned with or bargained with. They existed only to hunt and kill and consume. Captain. Lee walked to the front of the communication room and looked out the window at the stars. He could see 3 different colored suns in the distance and a small planet that might have water on its surface. It was a beautiful view that reminded him why he loved exploring space. But now everything was different. The peaceful galaxy that humanity had just started to explore was suddenly full of ancient terrors that could end their species without even trying. The smart thing to do would be to turn the ship around and head back to Earth as fast as possible. The rest of the crew was waiting for orders. They knew their captain was a good man who always tried to do the right thing. He had saved their lives many times during their exploration missions, and they trusted his judgment completely. Park Minji was still receiving messages from other ships and space stations. All of them were reporting the same thing: panic and fear as entire civilizations tried to escape from the approaching Vorthak fleets. Some messages were cut off in the middle, which probably meant those ships had already been destroyed. Captain Lee turned around and looked at each member of his crew. He saw Kim Tae-hyun with his strong hands ready to fix anything that broke. He saw Choi Soon-mi with her calm eyes that never showed fear. He saw Dr. Yang Ji-won with her curious mind that always wanted to learn new things. He saw Seo Jung-hwan with his precise calculations that had never been wrong. These were good people who had left their families and friends on Earth to explore the unknown parts of space. They had volunteered for a dangerous mission because they wanted to help humanity, learn about the galaxy, and maybe find new friends among the stars. Now they were being told to run away from the most dangerous creatures in the universe. Everyone else was running. The mighty Zenthari were running. The advanced Kellics were running. Even the numberless Breskin swarms had tried to run, but it was too late. Captain Lee made a decision that would change everything. He walked back to his command chair and sat down slowly. Then he looked at Navigator Seo Jung-wan and said something. That made everyone on the bridge stop breathing. "Set course for the Vorthak fleet," he said in a calm voice. "Maximum speed." The crew stared at him in shock. They thought maybe the stress of the situation had made their captain lose his mind, but when they looked at his eyes, they saw something else. They saw determination and courage, and maybe just a little bit of human stubbornness. Minji was the first to speak. "Captain," she said quietly, "are you sure about this? The Vorthak have destroyed every species that tried to fight them." Captain Lee smiled, and it was not a happy smile, but it was not a scared smile either. It was the kind of smile that humans got when they decided to do something impossible. "Yes," he said, "I am sure we are going to meet these Vorthak, and we are going to show them something they have never seen before. We are going to show them what humans can do when they refuse to give up." 6 months had passed since the Terra Nova arrived at the Empire capital, and the galaxy looked completely different. Admiral Li Wu-jin stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Humanity Rising, watching a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels patrol the Outer Rim territories. The promotion from captain to admiral had come with responsibilities he never imagined. The Galactic Empire High Council had voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership with special status as defenders of the peace. The ceremony had been broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy, showing Captain Lee receiving the Crystal Star of Courage, the Empire's highest honor. Dr. Yang Jiwon had established the Interspecies Medical Institute on the Empire. Capital World, where doctors from dozens of civilizations studied human psychology and adaptation techniques, her research had revolutionized understanding of how different species could overcome their natural limitations through mental training. The Vorthak. Great contemplation was finally ending after 6 months of philosophical discussion. Intelligence reports suggested that the ancient predators had reached conclusions that would change their civilization forever. They were reportedly abandoning their role as conquerors and seeking a new purpose in the Galaxy Security Chief Choi Sunmi had become the most famous fighter in galactic history. Her training academies were established on 47 worlds, and her students included warriors from species that had never worked together before. The techniques she taught were being called the Unity Combat System. The most dramatic success story came from the Breskin colonies. The insect people had used their freedom from Vorthak raids to expand their territory by 300% in just 6 months. They had also developed new technologies that combined their natural coordination with human tactical principles. Park Minji now held the rank of commander and was responsible for diplomatic communications between humanity and over 60 different species. Her translation protocols had become the standard for interspecies dialogue, and her communication methods were being taught in diplomatic schools across the galaxy. The Zenthari Crystal people had formed the first formal military alliance with humanity, combining their energy manipulation abilities with human strategic thinking. The partnership had produced defensive systems that were more effective than anything. Either species could create. A lone chief engineer, Kim Tae-hyun, had been promoted to Admiral of Engineering and was overseeing the construction of the first joint human-alien research stations. These facilities were producing technological advances that neither species could achieve independently. Navigator Seo Jung-wan commanded his own exploration fleet, mapping previously unknown regions of space that had been too dangerous to explore when the Vorthak were active. His ships carried mixed crews that represented the new spirit of cooperation spreading through the galaxy. The economic transformation was even more remarkable. The end of Vorthak raids had freed up enormous resources that were now being used for peaceful development, trade. Routes that had been closed for centuries were reopening, and new markets were emerging throughout the galaxy. The peaceful traders of the Inner Rim had become major supporters of human expansion, offering financial backing for exploration missions and colony development. Their protected status had allowed them to accumulate vast wealth that they were now willing to invest in a more secure galaxy ambassador. Williams had negotiated defense treaties with 18 different governments, creating a network of mutual protection that spanned half the known galaxy. The agreements were based on the principle that no single species should dominate others through fear and violence. The most significant change was happening among the Vorthak themselves. Reports from their homeworlds indicated that they were developing a completely new philosophy based on protection rather than predation. Their great warriors were training to become guardians of weaker species instead of their destroyers. The first Vorthak delegation to the Empire capital had arrived just 2 weeks ago, led by a reformed warrior who called himself Grax the Protector. The same alien who had once commanded bioships full of destruction now spoke about redemption and the search for a new purpose. The meeting between Admiral Lee and Grax had been broadcast across the galaxy, showing the human officer and the reformed Vorthak commander shaking hands in a gesture of mutual respect. The symbolism was powerful enough to inspire peace negotiations in conflicts that had lasted for decades. Dr. Yang Jiwon had examined the psychological changes in Vorthak volunteers and discovered that their defeat had triggered evolutionary adaptations in their brain structure. The species was literally evolving away from pure aggression toward a more balanced emotional range. The impact on younger generations was even more profound. Children from dozens of species were growing up with stories about the day when courage defeated fear and determination overcame impossible odds. The cultural shift was creating a generation that was more willing to cooperate and less willing to accept domination. Security Chief Choi Sunmi had established the Galactic Peace Corps, an organization of warriors from multiple species trained in her combat techniques. The Corps was dedicated to protecting weak civilizations from any future threats that might emerge. The first graduation ceremony for the Peace Corps had included students from 23 different species, all of whom had learned to fight not for conquest, but for protection. The diversity of the group would have been impossible before humanity proved that different approaches to combat could be equally valid. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun oversaw the construction of Unity Station, the largest space facility ever built. The station served as headquarters for joint research projects and as a symbol of what could be accomplished when different species worked together. The most surprising development came from species that had never been involved in galactic politics. The discovery that the Vorthak could be defeated had encouraged dozens of hidden civilizations to emerge from isolation and join the larger community park. Minji documented over 300 first contact events in the 6 months following the historic fight. The expansion of the galactic community was happening faster than anyone had thought possible, as fear gave way to curiosity and cooperation. Navigator Seo Jung-hwan led exploration missions into regions that had been Vorthak territory for millennia, discovering abandoned worlds that were slowly recovering from centuries of oppression. The terraforming projects to restore these planets had become symbols of renewal and hope. The Terra Nova itself had been preserved as a historical monument on the Empire capital world, the cargo bay where Choi Sunmi had fought V.